apocalyptic movement. By the 1940s, many of the men and women who had built the fundamentalist movement determined that the label fundamentalist was doing more harm than good, so they dropped it. They replaced fundamentalist with the older, more historic term evangelical. As this narrative moves into the 1940s and beyond, my language shifts again accordingly. I also include Pentecostals in this study. Pentecostalism, like fundamentalism, grew out of radical evangelicalism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Pentecostals' emphasis on the baptism with the Holy Spirit, an emotional experience that occurred after conversion, usually associated with speaking in tongues and other divine gifts, distinguished them from their fundamentalist peers. While I do not ignore the many differences that separated Pentecostals from other fundamentalists, by the early 1940s, they had joined together to craft the modern evangelical movement. It is important to take seriously the history that made a Pentecostal fundamentalist alliance possible, as well as the ways that Pentecostalism and fundamentalism overlapped in the early decades of the 20th century. The majority of this book necessarily focuses on elite white fundamentalists and evangelicals, the men and a small number of women who directed the movement, policed its borders, and crafted its public image. Laypeople read, heard, and interpreted the words, actions, and beliefs of prominent fundamentalists and evangelicals in many different ways. Nevertheless, I have sought to understand and narrate the attitudes and responses of laypeople through their correspondence with religious leaders, with each other, and to magazine editors. The thousands of letters I read erased any doubts I had about how seriously the faithful, laypeople and leaders alike, took their apocalyptic theology and all of its implications. There was little difference between the rhetoric they used in public and the beliefs and ideas they expressed in private. In fact, what the subjects of this book said in confidence about Christ's imminent return was often more decisive, tense, and anxiety-ridden than their public presentations. This book builds on 2 generations of excellent scholarship on American fundamentalism and evangelicalism. Looming large in the research on fundamentalism is the work of Ernest Sandin, George Marsden, and Joel Carpenter. Marsden defined fundamentalism in his now classic Fundamentalism and American Culture, 1980, as militantly anti-modernist Protestant evangelicalism. Fundamentalism, he further explained, was a loose, diverse, and changing federation of co-belligerents, united by their fierce opposition to modernist attempts to bring Christianity into line with modern thought. He later offered a simpler definition, echoing Jerry Falwell. A fundamentalist is an evangelical who is angry about something. Fundamentalism, according to Marsden, had deep intellectual roots, but it was also reactionary. The faithful organized in response to perceived threats to the faith. Sandin offered a narrower definition that identified millenarianism as fundamentalism's defining doctrine. The fundamentalist movement possessed a self-conscious identity and structure, he wrote, and it is millenarianism which gave life and shape to it. Marsden disagreed with Sandin's emphasis on millenarianism. It is doubtful that premillennialism was really the organizing principle of fundamentalism, he responded, even in the fundamentalist's own thought. In part, the difference between their definitions had to do with whom each counted as a fundamentalist.